My name is Carrie Lippincott. I'm the Executive Director of the Geneva Historical Society, and welcome to our April lecture series. Thank you so much for joining us. By now, everybody is probably a Zoom expert, but I just want to go over a few things before we get started with the program. First, everyone is on mute, and I ask that you remain on mute throughout the program, and we just will allow the speaker to be unmuted. That just cuts back on any feedback that might come through. The other thing is there's going to be time at the end of the program for question and answer, and we ask that you put any questions or comments that you might have, if you can put that in the chat, and that's a little bubble that looks like a chat bubble along the bottom of the screen. Ann Daly, our Director of Education, is going to be monitoring that throughout the evening. So at any time, if you have questions or comments, please just put it in the chat. Again, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and enjoy the program. Now I'll turn everything over to Ann Daly, our Director of Education.
Oh, hello, everybody. Good to see so many of you again. I always do, as most of you know, our ads for upcoming events, which of course we don't have a whole lot of, other than virtual things. And we're in the middle of our three-part spring lecture series, but we do have several exhibits at the museum. The museum is open, though there are capacity limitations. If you have not gone yet to see the exhibit on Geneva and education, it is running through April 24th, so you don't have too much more time to see that. And that's the piece that John put together, looking at all different types of education in Geneva, DeSales, public schools, etc. So definitely, if you haven't seen it yet, do stop in and see that. We also have a new community curator display in our small closet where we've been displaying different people's collections. Right now, what went up at the beginning of this month was a collection of poultry paraphernalia, try to say that fast, which is the collection of Marty Schlabach, who used to work at the Ag Station and is involved with our, don't see him here tonight, he does sometimes come to our programs. He's involved with the Antiques Club. So there's a lot of chicken waterers and some really interesting stuff. And there will be a video coming out explaining a lot of what he has in his collection. So keep your eyes on that. It will eventually be in our weekly updates. So if you are not signed up for our updates, make sure you do, because that will be the best way to find out what we're doing. We also have the My Geneva Is exhibit still up, and that's photos and captions contributed by members of the Geneva community, and they convey what Geneva is to the person who submitted them. That is up through June 26th. So we have those exhibits. We also have next Thursday, Antique Club of the Finger Lakes will be doing a virtual program. And that one is How Nestle Sweetened Life in Upstate New York. And it's presented by Jim Farfaglia. And there is a description on our website, and you can register there if you're interested in that program. The last program in our virtual spring series is going to be on May 4th. And that will be Suzanne Schnittman, also a former person who was in Geneva, taught at Hobart and William Smith at one point. And she is talking about her book, and she's got a slightly different title she gave me for the lecture, but it's essentially similar to her book, which is Provocative Mothers Raising Precocious Daughters, Women's Rights Leaders from the Finger Lakes. And so she'll be talking about that on May 4th, also virtually. So go to our website if you're interested in registering for that. So that is what we know we're doing. Everything else is, of course, like everywhere else, open to change at any moment. So we're not putting out any live events yet, but we do certainly hope to open Rose Hill this summer. So stop and see the museum if you have a chance in the meantime. So for this evening, I want to introduce Ronny Frishman, who spent more than 30 years writing for newspapers, magazines, and other media, including the Finger Lakes Times, as many of you know, and Gannett Rochester newspapers. She also taught journalism at Hobart and William Smith colleges. Her newest challenge has been sharing her storytelling with children and writing books for young readers. Her nonfiction middle grade book, Nina Allender, Suffrage Cartoonist, with a drawing pencil, she helped win the vote for women, was released last September, and she will be telling us more about Nina tonight in Nina Allender, Suffrage Cartoonist. So I will turn things over to Ronny.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I see names I know, boxes with names of people I know. It's really nice to be back in Geneva. I think I lived there for nearly 11 years, and Some of you know I worked at the Finger Lakes Times for about 10 years, and my husband was a professor in the economics department at Hobart and William Smith Colleges for 41 years. It's really gratifying to see that this series is partially funded by, I guess, the Sam Williams Fund, and I knew Sam well, and I sort of feel like I've come full circle by participating in this. Thank you to Anne and to the Society for inviting me to share the remarkable work of Nina Allender. It's especially appropriate that we talk about Nina now, because I think you all know that 2020 was the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. I'm going to tell you how I discovered Nina, and I will be sharing my screen, so you'll see a lot of her cartoons and photographs. This is the middle grade book that I've written, a little shameless plug. It's very, very thin. It's really, as I said, written for middle grade students, but a lot of adults have told me they thought it was interesting too, because there's a lot of information that a lot of us didn't know about. So I will start sharing my screen now.
And while you do that, I should mention we do have the book at the museum gift shop if anyone is interested.
Okay, let's go from the beginning. Okay, so here we have Nina Allender, and her name and face are not really well known, I think, among our suffrage heroines, but she played a vital role in the suffrage movement, particularly between 1913 and 1920. I came upon her work purely by chance. In 2016, my husband and I spent 4 months in Washington, D.C., where Alan was leading a semester for Hobart and William Smith students. We were living on Capitol Hill, and every day we would walk to the metro, we would pass this really interesting looking building. And we knew it must have had some sort of historical significance, but we didn't have time. We were always rushing to catch a train, so we didn't have time to stop in. One day we decided we were going to pay a visit, and it turned out to be the Sewell Belmont House and Museum. And that was the former headquarters of the National Woman's Party, which was founded by the famous suffragist Alice Paul.
Ronny,
Yeah.
your screen is not sharing.
Oh, it's not. Oh, I'm sorry. Whoops.
So I was going to say that, but I didn't want to interrupt you until you
Oh.
were mentioning a picture. I wasn't sure if it was intentional.
It's not sharing. I thought do you see that?
We just have you on camera.
You just have me. Okay. Let's go back. I knew this would play. What's going on here? Let's try again. You see that?
Yes, it said, yeah, oh, you've got it. Now you just need to do the slideshow.
You see that?
Yes, you've got it. Now
Okay.
you're good.
All right, so you probably you missed that picture before? That was the picture of Nina Allender. Okay, and this is the house that we were passing every day. As I said, it was called the Sewell Belmont House and Museum, and now it's called the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument. It's been taken over by the National Park Service. I mean, they were having financial issues, and the Park Service took it over. Anyway, it's the oldest house on Capitol Hill, and it's named for Alva Belmont, who was a socialite and a former president of the National Woman's Party. She actually bankrolled the purchase of the house in 1929, and this was the 5th site of the National Woman's Party. Prior to the passage of the 19th Amendment, the National Women's Party was, their officers were located closer to the White House and Lafayette Park, which is the park across from the White House. And that was really because they were picketing and they wanted to be close to the White House. So Nina Allender actually did not work in this building. The day we visited the house, there was this great exhibit by a cartoonist named Nina Allender. Most of her work had appeared in a weekly newspaper called The Suffragist, which was the propaganda arm of the National Woman's Party. As a former journalist in upstate New York, I fairly well informed about Seneca Falls, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and our area's contribution to women's suffrage, but I had never heard of Allender. As it turns out, Allender had only recently been rediscovered by the museum itself because the curator had been going through some boxes in closets and found a trove of her cartoons and all kinds of other information about Allender. So I was intrigued about Allender, and then because not only was she an activist, but she was a trailblazer in her own right as a political cartoonist in a field that was really predominantly for men. I thought Allender deserved more recognition, particularly with the anniversary of the 19th Amendment coming. So I spent the next several years doing research. So who was Nina Allender? She was born on Christmas Day in 1872 in Auburn, Kansas, to David and Eva Evans. Both of them were educators. Her father, David, actually has New York roots. He was a native New Yorker born in Steuben in Oneida County in 1841. He fought in the Civil War. He was with the 3rd Regiment New York Light Artillery and was actually injured. After the Civil War, he came back to New York and he attended something called Whitesboro College, which I think was someplace around the Utica area. And then he taught in Remsen, New York for a while. He actually got a job in 1868 and moved to Auburn, Kansas. And he boarded with a family of Dr. Cyrus and Catherine Moore. Kansas was good to David because he pretty soon he was named superintendent of the Topeka, Kansas public schools. And he also married the Moore's daughter, Eva, who was 12 years his junior and a teacher at a prairie school. Nina's younger sister, Catherine, was born in 1875. And 6 years later, when Nina was 9, the family packed up and moved to Washington, D.C. David Evans had a job working for the Department of the Navy, and his wife, Eva, got a job at the Department of the Interior. She was actually one of the department's first female employees. Clearly, Nina's parents valued education for their daughters. Women were gaining ground in the late 1800s, but many professions were still closed to them. Whether it was due to true talent or knowing the avenues that were open to her, Nina became very interested in art as a teenager. And she took classes at the Corcoran School of Art, which was in the center of DC. And she prepared for a career as a painter and art teacher. I don't know if many of you may be familiar with the Corcoran Gallery of Art. Beautiful, beautiful old gallery, big building. And it closed in 2014. And all of its holdings were turned over to the National Gallery of Art. It had a very big collection of American art. I wasn't able to find any of Nina's work, because they have not actually displayed any of that stuff. Anyway, romance put a sudden end to Nina's studies. In 1894, she was 22, and she married an Englishman named Charles Allender. He was quite a bit older than her, but had a reputation for being a real charmer. Her family used their connections to help him get a job as a bank employee. Unfortunately, the marriage was not a happy one, and Charles allegedly embezzled funds from the bank and ran off with another woman whom he also had charmed. Nina filed for divorce in 1905, in January 1905, and she cited Charles' infidelity, and their split became official in October 1905. They had no children, but Nina kept the Allender name. And here is a copy of the announcement, or this was, the first article was in the Washington Post, and it shows how when she filed for divorce, and the other one is from the Washington Evening Star when she got the divorce. I included this because I thought it was interesting just to see even the second little squib there about a Negro charged with housebreaking. It gives you a sense of the racism and the attitudes that were pervasive at the time, with Jim Crow laws and whatnot. So I just wanted to include that for that. So despite these tragic turn of events, there was a silver lining for Nina. She returned to her art studies. She enrolled at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia and studied under William Merritt Chase, who was an American impressionist, and Robert Henri, who was a painter in the Ashcan School. And that school is known for its gritty, realistic urban scenes. And I mention that because you'll see later in some of her cartoons, I think it shows his influence is pretty obvious in her work. She spent a summer touring art in Europe with some classmates, which included Charles Sheeler and Morton Schomburg. And they both became well-known modernist painters and good friends with Nina. I could not find any of her work, although I know she did exhibit some of it, but I recently found this, and it's a little hard to see, but it's a portrait from the rear of Nina Allender and Charles Sheeler, and it was painted by Morton Schomburg. And it looks like they're in a museum looking at a painting, perhaps when they were in Europe. There was no question that Nina was serious about her art. She continued to paint, she maintained a studio, and she even exhibited some landscapes at a gallery. I couldn't find, as I said, I couldn't find any examples of her big paintings, but in 1907, she illustrated a book called The Heroine of Roseland by Evelyn Raymond. And I did find some, I found the book actually on Amazon, and copies of her illustrations. And this was a book like a young adult novel for a teenage girl. So here's one of her paintings or illustrations, and here's another one. And I think, she clearly had talent. Living as an artist, however, did not pay the bills. And as an unmarried woman with no family wealth, she had to find a job. She worked as a clerk at the government land office and later at the Treasury Department. When Nina returned to Washington, D.C. after her trip to Europe, she moved in with her mother. Her father died in 1906, and he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Nina was independent-minded and opposed to the inequities facing women. She got involved in the suffrage movement, and in 1910, she joined the National American Woman Suffrage Association, or NAWSA. which was the organization that was started by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1890. Nina soon became president of the city's Stanton Suffrage Club, and then she went on to become president of the District of Columbia Women's Suffrage Association. Her niece, the American novelist Kay Boyle, wrote that her aunt told her how she would take to the Washington streets after work, knocking on doors, trying to get signatures to support a suffrage amendment. And often she would get maybe one or no signatures, but a lot of jeers and abuse from men and anti-suffragists. Anybody who's gone canvassing probably can relate. It was Nina's association with Alice Paul, however, that really changed everything. And here's a picture of Alice Paul. She was the founder of the National Women's Party. Eunice Haynes Irwin, who was a suffragist who knew both Alice Paul and Nina, recounted in her book, The History of Alice Paul and the National Women's Party, the first meeting between these two women. Paul was very petite, well-spoken. She showed up at Nina's house one Sunday afternoon wearing a purple hat. And this was in 1913. She only stayed for a short time, but she left having convinced Nina and her mother to donate both time and money regularly to the Congressional Union. And that was the precursor to the National Women's Party. It was actually still part of the NASA organization. As Irwin wrote, quote, "Before the arrival of this slim stranger, they had no more idea of contributing so much money or work than of flying." Alice Paul had this kind of effect on people. She was passionate, fearless, and very well educated. She had a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and attended the London School of Economics. During her time in Great Britain, she was greatly influenced by the British suffragist Emmeline Pankhurst, who advocated for very bold, radical tactics to win the vote. In Britain, Pankhurst led a lot of demonstrations and hunger strikes. Paul participated in a lot of these actions in Britain, and she was actually arrested and jailed in Britain with other suffragists. When she got back to the United States, she actually promoted similar militant measures here. This led to her eventual split with the more reserved suffragists in NASA and her founding of the National Women's Party. Alice Paul's goal was a federal amendment, and she saw that keeping the issue in the public eye was really the way to change minds. Up until now, they had been really going state by state. Everybody wanted, a federal amendment sounded wonderful and it was introduced, but it was never passed. So the suffragists were going from state to state to try to get the vote passed for women. But Paul, she wanted the amendment, a federal amendment, and that's what she set her sights on. So Nina and Paul became friends and colleagues. Nina helped organize the March 3rd, 1913 suffrage parade, which was held the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. Supposedly, Wilson arrived at the train station and thought that there would be a big, group to welcome him, and very few people were there because they were all watching the women's suffrage parade. Here's a photo of Eunice Milholland Boissevan, who dressed like a warrior princess, and she led the procession of more than 5,000 suffragists down Pennsylvania Avenue. Nina continued to take on more roles. She was traveling and organizing in other states, and she earned quite a reputation as an effective orator. Keeping suffrage in the headlines was really paramount to Paul. Newspapers were in their heyday, and there were a lot of them, and everybody read them to stay up to date with the news. The National Woman's Party published its own weekly newspaper called The Suffragist. Alice Paul wanted Nina to draw cartoons for the newspaper. Nina resisted at first. She still considered herself a painter and she wanted to paint. But by 1914, she was already producing some powerful sketches, some of them pretty scandalous, to attract more people to the suffrage cause. Certainly, there was nothing new about political cartooning. The craft had been used in the United States since colonial times. Not many people were literate, so cartoons and pictures were the way to inform people. But until the early 1900s, it was really a profession for men. Nina had some contemporaries, such as Lou Rogers and Blanche Ames, who also cartooned for women's rights. But Nina was the only one who had a regular platform every week as the official cartoonist of the National Woman's Party. And she clearly enjoyed it. Political cartooning gives you a sense of power that nothing else does. Here's an example of front page of the Suffragist. It was a big spreadsheet, and every week, almost every week, she would have a cartoon on the cover. Over the previous decades, male cartoonists like to portray suffragists as ugly, nagging, unfeminine women who were unable to find husbands. Here's one which shows a very unflattering image of a woman. Basically, the man has been emasculated and his wife is, looks like she's taking on the role, leaving the house, going to maybe be the breadwinner, leave him to take care of the children and the home front. That surely wasn't acceptable to men. And here's another one showing fairly unattractive women who, it says suffragettes who have never been kissed. Nina's cartoons changed that image. She depicted suffragists as modern, attractive, confident women. This is a very famous cartoon. Our hat is in the ring, and it shows a very fashionably dressed young woman, hands on the hip. Her ankles are revealed, which is pretty risque for the time. And, the men in the background just don't know what to make of her. This figure became known as the Allender girl, and she became the new ideal for the women's rights crusader. Nina poked fun at stereotypes that women would only be housewives and mothers. She wasn't afraid to criticize powerful men, including the president and congressmen. She used familiar symbols that we still see today, like the donkey for the Democrats, the elephant for the GOP, Uncle Sam for the US, and a goddess for liberty and justice. The suffragists named their proposed amendment the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, and Anthony appeared in many of Nina's cartoons. Nina's work also addressed social and political concerns, such as the harsh working conditions in factories, women's low wages, and the barriers to promotion. While she often highlighted the plight of poor women and children, she really did not address the racism or Jim Crow laws. And people of color did not appear in her cartoons, and there were really any reference to them was not favorable. Here's an example of a cartoon from 1917, and the women were already picketing and getting arrested at this time. And this says, the caption on the bottom says, "Refined, intelligent society women act as pickets and are thrown into the workhouse with Negroes and criminals." Today, of course, we're learning about the many Black, immigrant, and other marginalized women who played a role in suffrage. But Allender, Paul, and their cohorts were mainly middle and upper class white women. They did want the vote for all women, and they were convinced that women could help to solve the social and political problems that plague the nation, but they were not an inclusive group of women. So let's look at some of her cartoons. Here are some examples. Here's one from 1918, where she has, you know, mother at the wife, whatever, at the stove, cooking up some 1918 election soup, as I like to say. If he doesn't stop talking and come in, his dinner will be spoiled, and the men are outside talking politics. Here's another one. This one features, it says that child, you can't really see, needs a mother to look after her. That's what the women in the background are saying. And on the bottom, the title is Come to Mother. And mother here, this woman with her arms outstretched, is Jeanette Rankin, who was the first female congresswoman. She was a pacifist, and she came from Montana, and she actually served twice for 2 terms in the Congress, and she voted against both world wars. She was a suffragist and a pacifist, and was basically part of the movement with Paul and Allender. This one is one of my favorites because it's just so silly. It's so funny. It's the Cinderella. It's a play on the Cinderella story. And here she has President Woodrow Wilson dressed as the fairy godmother. They saw Wilson really, he really could have helped. He could have helped them with the cause, but he was not a supporter of a federal amendment, and he supported going state by state. So they were clearly trying to change his mind, and they thought if he changed his mind, then perhaps Congress likely would follow suit. So here we have one where it says, the pumpkin shall be the coach, the mice will be the horses to pull it, and you shall go to the polls. But that was, of course, only if he would agree. And in 1915, he was not supporting a federal amendment. Here's another one, Inspiration of the Suffrage Workers. And it says Votes for Mothers on the bottom. And you have a picture, a very sad looking picture of a poor mother and her children. They've been scrounging through the trash can, obviously for food. Again, I think this might be where she was influenced by that artist, Robert Henri, because it's an urban scene and it shows the ugly side of urban squalor. This is also one of my favorites, American Justice. And we have Uncle Sam, and I will tell you what it says. He's presenting a woman who's bound and gagged. American women. This is while during First World War, United States is in the war. American women, you are our inspiration. You give us our soldiers, you conserve our food, you work in our munitions factories, you serve our sick and wounded. Accept this bouquet. And this bound and gagged woman, her ropes say, unequal wages, equal work, unequal political power, kindly omit flowers. At this time, women felt that Woodrow Wilson was being very hypocritical by sending troops to Europe he claimed he was trying to preserve democracy in Europe when democracy did not exist in the United States. Here's another one that features Susan B. Anthony she did this, Allender did this to commemorate Anthony's birthday, which is February 15th, and this was in 1915. And there's a little inset there of Anthony in 1875 going up the steps, I believe, of the Supreme Court all by herself. By 1915, she's got many adorers and followers, but of course, you know, she died in 1906. But still, she was a great symbol for the movement. Here's another one, crumbs from the man's table, from the rich man's table, sorry. Thanks, we want to sit at the table. Again, you have a really lovely looking woman, very fashionably dressed, always neat, always refined. This is how they wanted to show themselves. So Nina became fairly well known at the time, and so did her messaging. Here's a picture of her. This appeared in a lot of newspapers. She was featured in a lot of articles. I found a lot of stories, interviews with her. This was an interview, a full page that she did, and she says, "Some suffrage niche for every woman." She was trying to tell women they could all find a role. You know, you could stuff envelopes, you could walk, you could canvas. There was something for everybody in the movement. A January 1915 article in the Washington Times said, "Each of Mrs. Allender's pictures is not only an argument for suffrage, it is in reality a speech in itself." So here are some other features. I picked this one out because this was from her home state, the same picture. That must have been like her headshot or something. And this one, here's one that was on the front page of the Washington Post. And this came out right after the women started picketing the White House. And Nina is featured. Her headshot is right, the second to the last on the right. And this was an article about, you know, women who were leading these and organizing the pickets. And here we have, I believe this was the first picket line at the White House. And this was Alice Paul's idea. And these women picketed the White House every day except Sunday. And they started in February. This was College Day on the picket line. And you can see Oberlin's represented, University of Missouri, I think, Stanford. Can't see what some of the others said, but they always had to be very well dressed. They had their sash, and you know, they did not cause a tumult. They always had, you know, banners or posters, and they were not received well by the public. People thought that they were being disrespectful and disloyal to the country because the US was in the war. And they thought that what they were saying, they were basically attacking Woodrow Wilson, which was unfair. Women were attacked by mobs of men on occasion. And here's one of her, Nina's cartoons showing you know, men attacking her. They were, as I said, they were always made sure they looked really refined and well-dressed. And even though if you read articles written by men or in the newspapers, they were depicted as criminals in the media. Unlike Alice Paul and other National Women's Party members, Nina was never arrested or imprisoned. I think they wanted her protected, and she was the one who had to really let people know what was going on, so they couldn't risk having her arrested. Women like Alice Paul, they were placed in this workhouse in Virginia, the Occoquan workhouse. They went on a hunger strike and they were force-fed and beaten. And Nina told the world about it. And here's one of her cartoons showing women behind bars. And again, saying to the president, Mr. President, what will you do for women's suffrage? I mean, basically, they felt that he had the power to change things. She designed a pin, which if I'm actually wearing one, I don't know if you can see it, it's a replica, Jailed for Freedom pin. And I think this was Alice Paul's idea, but Nina Allender designed it. And leave it to those suffragists. They made a media event out of everything. They had a special presentation of the prison pins to 97 women who had been imprisoned after picketing. After World War I, President Wilson changed his position on suffrage. He decided women had contributed to the war cause and waited long enough for a federal amendment. The House of Representatives passed the 19th Amendment in May 1919, and the Senate passed it a month later. But as you all know, that did not mean it was going to be enacted into law. You needed to have 3/4 of the states ratify it, and that meant 36 states. It took a year to get 35 states to ratify it, and in August 1920, Tennessee was the last, was what they thought, was hoping would be the last. And both the national representatives from the National Women's Party and from NASA descended upon Tennessee, Nashville, to convince the state legislature to ratify the amendment. And here's what Nina's cartoon, where she's trying to get a bipartisan effort, now all together for the 36. She has the suffragists bringing both the Democrats and the Republicans together. And I don't know, it did pass by 1 vote. There's a wonderful book called The Woman's Hour by Elaine Weiss, which is all about what happened in Tennessee. And even though you know the outcome, it's really very exciting. And when you hear about all the nonsense that went on, it sounds just a lot like today. That's all I could say. So the day after it was passed, the 19th Amendment was passed, Nina drew another cartoon that said, shows a suffragist in bed, any good suffragist the morning after. I mean, they were exhausted after decades and decades of work. On September 1st, 1920, this is what appeared on the cover of the Suffragist. There was no caption, nothing, just the lovely goddess woman with victory, a victory sign. Winning the vote did not curtail the activities of Nina, Alice Paul, and other National Women's Party members. In 1923, the organization began pursuing an Equal Rights Amendment, which would ban all discrimination based on a person's sex or gender. The National Women's Party scrapped publication of the Suffragist and launched a new newspaper called Equal Rights. Nina again was drawing cartoons, this time focusing on gender equality and the unfair treatment of women in the workplace. She continued cartooning until the late 1920s, and in all produced about 300 cartoons on suffrage and women's rights. Here's a picture it said 1921. I have a feeling this might even be later, but here she is in her studio with a lot of her cartoons. Here's a cartoon that appeared in Equal Rights magazine in 1924. And it says, I guess the title was Equal Pay for Equal Work. The text said the waitress was saying, but how do I get this equal work? And the judge says, the law protects you from that. Waitress, he is protected, not I. Nina spent the next 2 decades working in various capacities for the National Women's Party. Alice Paul created the World Women's Party in the 1930s to raise the status of women internationally. And Nina and her sister, Kathleen Evans Boyle, were named honorary chairman to that. In 1936, the US Postal Service issued a 3-cent Susan B. Anthony stamp. Supposedly it came from one of Nina's drawings. I'm not sure which one, but that's what I could find. Nina moved to Chicago in 1942 and resigned from the National Women's Party in 1946. She corresponded with Alice Paul, who was very worried about her friend's loneliness and actually invited her to come and live at the Belmont house. Several of the women were living there. Nina must have been in poor health in her later years because she moved in with a niece, Joan Detweiler, in Plainfield, New Jersey. Here's a picture of Nina. I'm not sure where it is. It could have been at the house in Washington, but it's a little changed, and maybe we should just visiting somebody. But she's in the center there, clearly older. Her hair is white here. She was 85 when she died on April 2nd, 1957. Her obituary appeared in the New York Times and other newspapers. And here's this is an obit from the Courier News, which was in Bridgewater, New Jersey, and that's where she was living in New Jersey when she died. She didn't have a big spread, but she was acknowledged for her suffrage work. Nina's cartoons were a powerful force in public opinion and likely inspired countless individuals to persist in the struggle for women's suffrage. As a female cartoonist, she also proved that women could excel in a field traditionally led by men. If you might have seen last summer or less in August, the New York Times had a special section on suffrage, and they did feature Nina Allender. So I have been seeing her name and her cartoons in more places. The museum has been trying to publicize her a little bit more. As Inez Hayes Irwin wrote about Allender in her book, quote, her work is full of intimate details of the woman's life, from her little girlhood to her old age. And she translates that existence with the woman's sense of humor, a humor which plays keenly and gracefully about masculine insensibility, a humor as realistic but as archly unbitter as that of Jane Austen. It would have been impossible for any man to have done Mrs. Allender's work, a woman speaking to women about women in the language of women. I think that sort of says it all. Here's another picture of her when she was younger. I really like that picture. Just wanted to tell you, I got most of my photographs and cartoons are the courtesy of the National Women's Party and the Library of Congress. If you're interested in knowing more about them, both these places have, all her cartoons. The National Women's Party had all her cartoons, but they recently turned them over to the Library of Congress. But the National Women's Party, if you go to that website, they have lots of information. They have scrapbooks, and you can you can view it right from, from your home office, because it's all online. I urge you to go visit that place if you're ever there. It's not very big. It has a lot of interesting interesting things, including a collection of cards that the women wrote after they visited a congressman. They would write down information about this person, and how apt this person was to support them, and little characteristics of it, just things that, characteristics of these people you'd want to know about them, just as we might do today. If you want to know more about suffrage cartoonists, there's a great book called Cartooning for Suffrage by Alice Shepard. I think it's out of print, but I did find a copy on Amazon, and you might see it in the library. And more recently, there's this book by Allison Lang called Picturing Political Power, Images in the Women's Suffrage Movement. And again, I'm back to my book, which is available at the Historical Society. You can shine my website. I also have a little bit of information. I have a timeline of the suffrage movement. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I'm sorry about the technological glitch in the beginning, but I'm happy to take any questions.
We haven't got any in the text box yet, so I'm going to mention again, if anybody wants to type one in, go ahead and do so. I did want to ask, I was on the website of the National Women's Party when I was looking for images to use with the publicity, and I don't remember, because I was focusing mostly on the collections, and I don't know, it's a little ancillary to what you were talking about. What is the function of the party today? Are they still an active political party?
It's actually not. I think they really haven't disbanded, or they sort of see themselves as a research arm now. I was surprised myself to find that they were sort of still in existence. And of course, we all know what happened to the ERA. I mean, we're still waiting for that. But the museum's changed its name, to, it was all about the National Women's Party. And now they see themselves mostly as as a research arm and a resource for people who are doing this work. They have a lot of information. They were very supportive of me when I was doing this. Person who's there is now moved to the Senate, but, and they did have they had an exhibit, a traveling exhibit that they were sending around, not a very large exhibit. I actually was going to bring it to Rochester, but then I started doing my own talks and thought I was showing even more than they had. So, but technically they're still in existence, I believe.
Yeah, I was quite surprised when I found that, because I was looking, I assumed there'd be something at the Library of Congress, and I was like, oh, the National Women's Party, they're still around. And I do suggest going to the website, because they have a collections database online, and you can see a lot of the materials, including, I don't know if it's the full extent of the Allender collection, but quite a lot of the cartoons are digitized and can be viewed on their website. So,
and the same thing with the Library of Congress, I think, has full collection of those newspapers, the Suffragist, and and they went on for years, so it was it's quite extensive.
Yeah, it was a wonderful story, and one that, yeah, I also had not been familiar with. Just comment that it was a very good and informative lecture. You must have covered all the bases. We don't seem to have any questions. Okay. So I guess everyone learned everything. Now you just need to go and buy the book and give it to your grandkids, nieces, and nephews, so they know the story too.
Okay.
So,
thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Ronny.
Okay.
I appreciate it. And we hope to see you all again in May, because we're going to continue